Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Today is going to be a very good one. I have a very good brother here. Phineas is someone that I've known for a while, and we're going to talk. We're going to have a very good conversation. So I'm going to make sure that Phineas gets on. And I'm told there were a lot of things in Ghana and stuff like that. So there he is. Finny, good to see you, my brother. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good to see you too.
You know, I know that this is going to be a very deep conversation, and I have reasons why I'm saying that. Hopefully, I remember when I sent this to you, you said, "Oh wow," I had to I had to look at this again. So let me just be clear that it's not going to be anything scary, but I think that this is going to be a very useful conversation, especially for those who are joining us today. And I want to make sure that I lay the foundation and the reason why we are having this conversation, and the reason why I'm particularly interested in what we are doing at the Believers Avenue, especially with Rethinking Beliefs. And so for those of you who are joining us and you've never probably joined us before, this is Rethinking Beliefs by the Believers Avenue. We find the need to be fair-minded and to learn and to ask all the relevant questions that we have to ask. And today we are going to talk about, can there be evidence for a God who is spirit? That is a very important thing to actually talk about. And I'll tell you why. You know, as someone who has preached the gospel for quite some time, and someone who has also been a debater for some time, sometimes I listen to the argument for God, and in all humility, a lot of times it makes no sense. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we're trying to provide an evidence for a God who is spirit. Jesus says that God is spirit. Now, again, if God is spirit, what could possibly be the evidence for a God who is spirit? And if we don't talk about this, we kind of run about, and then we keep shifting the goalpost. And I remember one time I was listening to a man of God talk about God. And then he said that we can never know God. God is who he is. And then he says, God is spirit. And we can never know who God is. And he concluded by saying, but the people should believe in it. And I remember listening to it, and as a preacher, I thought, well, how do you say that God is who he is and God is spirit, and yet you tell people to believe in such a God? How do you point people to a God who cannot be proven, cannot be seen, can probably not be known, as the preacher said, and I'm not saying that. And yet, how do you make these claims and yet tell people to believe in him? So I thought that is a very dangerous thing to do. I mean, if you tell people God is spirit, which is true, of course, that's what Jesus said, and there's we can never know who he is, but he is there. It's like, what are you saying? He is who he is, and then we go into all the charismatic mode and we say God is who he is. I am that I am, and we can never know who God is, and all those things, which I mean, here at this point I'm kind of bracketing my faith there, so don't come at me, don't say that's what he says. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, listening to the person with a fair-minded attitude and kind of listening to what the preacher was saying about God, and then coming to the conclusion that people should believe in a God like that, a God that you claim that he is spirit, and a God that you claim that he cannot be known, and the God that you claim that he is immaterial, he is timeless, he is spaceless. And then after saying all that, you said, but believe in him. I'm like, okay, this is like if my son showed up in my room right now and said, oh, I just saw a spirit in my room, and then the spirit was doing some things, and I said, oh, okay, fine. I mean, that I find that to be a problem. I don't know. I do not know about you. I'm going to bring Phineas, and we are going to talk. Okay, we are going to have a very honest conversation about this. And I always say this, that Christians have to have fair-minded. We have to be fair-minded. God is not asking any one of you to be a judge for him. He's not asking any one of you to go to war for him. he just wants you to know him in truth. Jesus says, he says, the Father seeks for those who worship him in truth. So if you don't know, like me, just kind of be here and then let's all learn. Phineas is going to talk to me, and Phineas is the host of Faith and Reason, an incredibly gifted man. And I do like him so much, and I love his teaching. So if you do not know his platform on YouTube, make sure you search for Faith and Reason. It has this sign, post, black, white, and make sure that you subscribe. Let me bring in Phineas, and let's see if we can get our conversation going today. There he is.
Yeah.
Finny, good to see you. Good to see you. And today is going to be an interesting day. We're going to talk. And the reason why it's going to be an interesting day is because I've never had a conversation like this with anyone. I've never really taken the time to talk to people on a topic like this. So I do not know how it will be, but I'm going to be as fair as possible, okay? And I'm going to try not to take any side. I'm just going to make sure that we have a good conversation. And if we understand, praise God. If we don't understand, we go back and we go steady. But that's something that I'm really hoping for. And I'm excited to see you.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here for this conversation. It's a very interesting one, quite challenging, but yeah, let's have it.
Great. So I was talking about being a preacher for all these years, and also being a debater, and how I find a lot of these debates, and I will have to apologize for that, how I find a lot of these debates about God very boring. As a matter of fact, if I was to be sincere and I was to adjudicate, I will always say that the atheist won. And not because the argument for God is not strong. I think I will say this. I think that the first thing is the lack of clear definition for God in most of these debates. It's like in my opinion, we are debating a God who is different in the mind of the believer from the mind of the atheist. And there's no way we are able to have a common ground on who this God is. So it's always very weird to debate for or against such a thing, And the reason is, in the atheist mind, God is the God that the Christian think is a God who can be proven and must be shown, and that they can't find him in the universe. And so, of course, that argument is definitely going to be a loss to the believer, because if that's not the God that you believe in, that's never going to be something that you will win. And then there is a Christian side where they also have this thing about the usefulness of the faith, as though we debate Christianity to be useful, a useful belief, and not necessarily a true belief. So you are having a debate with people who are asking, what is the proof for God? And you're talking about how Christianity is the reason why there is morality. Now, you're talking about something that is a useful belief. You're not necessarily talking about something that is true. And so I find most of these debates to be very boring, quite frankly. But then again, I do not claim to know better. I just wish that there will be a good definition for God. Or what God are we debating on, and who is this God? Is God a spirit? And that way, if you said God is a spirit, then the whole argument of can we have evidence for God will not even exist. And if we have to argue on that, then it will bring us to the very question that we are going to have on today. Because then if we agree that God is a spirit and that God is not something material and something in space or someone in space, whatever it is, then we can come to this particular conversation and say, well, how do you prove something that is spirit? And even setting aside the God argument, generally, how do you even prove anything that is spirit? I mean, how do you prove it? And when I study the Bible, I see something interesting. I think that, especially the New Testament, there is a clear emphasis on faith and works. You can see that the Bible is not presenting faith aside works. The Bible seems to be presenting faith with works, that you believe because there were signs and wonders. So Jesus sent them, he gave them the commandment and the commission, and then he says, go baptizing them. He says, these signs will follow them that believe. So he gives them signs. So you clearly can see that the Christian faith, I'm not talking about the entire Bible, but the Christian faith is presenting a God who has works that proves him. even though they could not see him. And the same thing is true for the story of, like, the Israelites, for instance, going through the Red Sea. There's a that the Red Sea actually opened. And if you saw the Red Sea open, you obviously wouldn't say there is no God. Right. And so fast forward, we are here. We live in a generation where today, I think a good number of people who are becoming agnostics are really, really becoming agnostics because they're trying to be fair. They're saying, well, where is the evidence for God? Show me the evidence for God. And then I see a lot of Christians who are saying, you're going to hell. You're going to hell. Like, the person is saying that you claim that there is God. Just show me the evidence for God. At least for those who walked with Jesus, they probably saw Jesus bring someone back to life. They saw Jesus walk on water. I don't know what they saw, but some way, somehow, to the point where they will want to die. Now, you and I have a very different story altogether. We never saw Jesus. We never saw him do all these miracles. We never saw a God who parted the Red Sea. We never saw all these kind of things. So if someone in today's world asks the question, give me the evidence for God, I don't think that's a wrong question. I think that's fair. I don't know what you think, but I think that's fair. And then there's a part where it seems like the Bible is saying, like in Romans chapter 1, that the Bible is saying God has made himself evident in creation. And I said, well, you can't just take creation and then attribute it to God and say that's the evidence for God. And I'm saying this to be fair to you guys. I know some of you will say, that guy's a pastor and he's talking like this. But I just feel like you have to be fair to yourself. I'm serious. Like, the reason why I believe in Jesus is a very personal testimony. And that's why I wish that there could be this conversation. That's why I'm going to ask you, Finney. So I know that there is a good argument for Christianity that, well, morality, there's a reason why, and all these civilization and all those. Now, that is just talking about a useful belief to me. You're not necessarily talking about the true beliefs. The fact that Christianity has been helpful does not make it true. And I don't think that's what Jesus was talking about. Jesus was presenting to them. He says, I came to testify, bear witness of the truth. And so if you're going to talk about the Christian God, we better start talking about what is true. And you and I know that, in a way, if you're going to talk about true belief, one of the things that becomes useful and important is the evidence that supports it. And that brings me to the question whether something has to be provable to be true. Do we have to, which I do know in my own life, that it's not everything that I can prove, but then they're true. So I do know, at least personally, that everything, I can't prove everything to make it true. I can't. I can't say that if it cannot be provable, then it's not true. I don't think that would be fair too, because there are a lot of things in my life that I can prove, but I know that it's true. Now, why do I know that it's true? It could be because it's personal to me, or because I experienced it, or because I've encountered them, yes. But I can't just tell anyone, like the atheist who has not experienced that, it has to be true for you if they have not experienced it. So this is the reason for this conversation. I hope people don't get uncomfortable and say, let me just get off. These people are trying to say we shouldn't believe in God. I'm just hoping. So Finney, let's talk. I think this is where we begin. And I want to understand from the Bible what qualifies, in your opinion, as an evidence for God? Like, what should we accept as an evidence for a God who is spirit? In all honesty, like, what do you think is a sufficient evidence for us to accept, say, this proves that there is God?
It's actually a very interesting one. I would say this, that all of life is built on a priori assumptions that are accepted as faith. All of life, a priori assumptions, because as he said, not everything can be proven. And because not everything can be proven, you realize that once you begin to prove everything, you begin to get into infinite regress. And by infinite regress, I mean you begin to ask, and then you ask why for that. You ask why for that. You keep going, And a very simple example I use is, if someone were to walk to me and ask me, why am I called Phineas?
Right.
The answer I'll give to the person is, well, my parents named me Phineas. Then the person goes on to say, well, what authority do they have to give you a name? Well, they gave birth to me. And then he goes on and he's like, do you remember being born? I'm going to be like, no, I don't remember being born. Says,
Right.
okay, so how do you know they actually gave birth to you? I'm going to say, oh, there's a certificate that has my name and has the and it says that okay, my name is Phineas, they are my parents. Like, what if there is a cover up and you are Elon Musk's lost adopted brother and they're just playing a grand cover up just to make you think you are Phineas or say you live in Ghana in the central.
Mm,
I'm going to say, well, I could do a DNA test. And then if
mm,
there's a match with my parents, then I know that they are actually my parents and they had the authority to name me Phineas. He
right.
says, well, we have heard of incidences where scientific institutions were in league with people who wanted to keep an agenda going. So what if your parents have paid them off to give you a certain result that says that oh it matches, so they are your parents, and on and on and on. Now the point is, at some point, I have to tell this person, look, I cannot prove beyond reasonable doubts to you that these people are my parents or
Mm,
that my name is actually Phineas. I've just taken it on authority based
right.
on the understanding I have, the integrity of the government institution that gave me my certificate, the integrity of the scientific institution that would carry out the DNA test, and on and
Right.
on and on, and say that these people have to be right. And because they were right and they are accurate, I trust that my name is Phineas. Something like that. So at some point, there is an a priori assumption that is going on. And I'm just taking that as faith and I'm running because not everything to the finest detail can be proven. But it doesn't mean there is no need for evidence.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way, just as people walk about with faith in different things, and
Right.
can have some argument to give for it, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that this God who is immaterial, this God who is spirit, has not left us any evidence at all. He has left us evidence. Oftentimes, the issue becomes what people consider to be sufficient evidence for themselves. So,
Okay.
what convinces one person could be insufficient for someone else.
Right.
And the Christian faith paints this situation so well. The Christian faith depicts the human condition. On the cross, when their Lord and Savior, the Lord and Savior of Christianity, Jesus Christ,
Mm,
is on the cross, he's between two thieves. Now,
right.
the two thieves metaphorically represent humanity who have stolen the identity that they're living with. Now,
Mm,
you have two people looking at the same evidence, and one of them looks at the evidence of Jesus and comes to the conclusion that this man is who he says he is. And in fact, places faith in this man for afterlife. Now,
right.
the other person looks at that same evidence and concludes that Jesus has to be a charlatan. Why? He thinks that if Jesus is who he says he is, he has to do one more test or give one more proof. That is,
Okay.
save himself and save us too, if he says he's who he is. And the Christian faith is painting the human condition and saying that in the face of the biggest evidence that God can give us, which is him becoming a man and dying for us, some people are still going to demand some more evidence before they believe. So it's a very interesting situation where it's more like for the one who is convinced, no explanation is necessary. But for the one who doubts, then no explanation will be sufficient, sort of.
So,
But there are
so,
people
oh, no,
you,
go
you
ahead. Sorry.
uh,
Sorry.
there are people who are genuinely looking to believe.
Right.
For such people, you would have to tell them, well, we have to consider the cause and effect experience of things because in every human life we know that where there's effects there has to be cause,
Mm-hmm.
and the reason the Bible goes straight to creation is it becomes the easiest way to talk about cause and effect. So the Bible
Right.
starts with an a priori assumption that God exists. It believes that whoever comes to the Bible has to have faith. So it just starts in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. It doesn't start
Mm,
by as a formula as to how to prove God. It doesn't do anything. It just tells you God exists and that He created heaven and earth. Now, if He created heaven and earth, then there have to be certain qualities that Earth would have, at least for where we are living. That should tell us that there is a creator behind. So one of the biggest arguments, now it's not an evidence, but it's an argument that people have raised to point to the evidence of a God who is spirit, because, and he has to be spirit because if earth runs on time, space, and matter, then whoever is creating the time, space, and matter complex has to be outside of time, has to be outside of space, has to be outside of matter. So he has to be spirit, essentially. Now, the argument which William Lane Craig, one of probably the most robust
Yeah, the
Christian
Kalam,
philosophers today,
the Kalam
says,
argument.
calls it the Kalam cosmological argument. And
Right,
he says, okay, everything that exists had a beginning. Everything that exists had a beginning.
right,
Now, it has been proven scientifically that the earth began to exist. I mean, there is
right.
justifiable belief. I'm a Christian, but I think there is justifiable belief in the Big Bang, for example, because it shows that there is a big banger who started everything on or off. For, forgive my language, but he sets the Big Bang in motion, basically. And so
Right.
we can say, okay, it started at this time, and the Earth is this number of years old. The only reason why you can measure time is because at some point time had to be zero and start counting. Now,
Okay.
if time had to be zero, and then we can stand today and say the Earth is 60 billion years old or 6,000 years old, it's because there has to be a cause behind the whole creation of the
Yeah.
earth. And that becomes one of the most simple reasons that people give for, okay, there
For
has to
God.
be it's not a Christian God,
So,
it's
so
not.
they take the creation and they say, well, I mean, of course, we all can agree that creation is there because we live in it. I can see you.
Yeah,
Whether people
yeah.
think all these are real or not is a very different argument, but we all can see that. But how then do you take creation and just say that? Let me just dash it to God and say, well, you know what? Whatever it is, I just feel like, okay, this is an evidence for you. Like, and this is the thing I feel. In all fairness, like it doesn't make any sense. You just cannot pick. It's almost like saying, oh well, I don't know how the ball got here, and so I say, well, it belongs to my brother. You can't just say it belongs to your brother. What you need to, like, the point is this: you have to prove beyond the fact that you don't know. And again, this is why I always say this: these debates get boring for me. I'm talking about the Christian atheist boring conversation. Is because, again, like, for instance, if you're a Christian, you make this argument of the Column. I respect Dr. Craig. I seriously believe that he's a very, very gifted man. But what I'm saying is that it still does not say anything about God. It doesn't mean that it's not sufficient evidence, like you said. I mean, the Bible could present creation as evidence for God, that the invisible qualities of God has been made evident in creation, of course. But again, if you can't fault someone who says, I mean, I can't see this God, but I can see the world. I believe in the world and I don't believe in God. How do you fault someone like that? And this is why I want to know. And I wish I had other people actually for other faiths, but I think Christianity makes an attempt. I'm choosing these words carefully, making attempts, because again, I hope that someone does not bring this up probably years later and say he didn't believe in God himself. I did believe in God, so I have to chip that in. But I'm choosing these words carefully for a reason, because again, like I said, I'm bracketing my faith at this point to make us have a fair conversation. Right. But I think Christianity makes an attempt presenting a God who does something more than that. And that's why I ask about the miracles and the signs. So we see God not just sit somewhere and say, well, give dash creation to me. God doesn't say that, but God comes in and does the impossible. In fact, a lot of times that goes beyond what is like human beings can explain. And people saw it. And I don't think if these things are common, people can doubt God. I'm not saying everybody will. The Bible is clear why people reject God, and that's far beyond evidence. People reject it because some people like darkness. It's not like they don't want God who will be judging their actions. That is also true. But
Yeah.
I mean, we can talk about the Red Sea opening. We can talk about the burning bush. We can talk about Jesus ascending to heaven. We can talk about Jesus resurrecting from the dead, and we can talk about that. And then we talk about our time. probably the closest we have to evidence of God is a WhatsApp message of someone's testimony, or let's say, something that someone did, and people are asking that, wait, just show. This is not a point for debate. And I always say this, like, I mean, if I walked in a debate argument for God, this is not the time where you come do God is here and God is that and God is spirit. I don't need all that. You just show up and you say, okay, you know what? So this is the event that happened in your life. And people will say, oh no, of course, that's a lie. You read it somewhere. And the person tells you that, okay, well, this is what is actually going to happen in the next minute or in the next weeks. And then it happened. And then the people are like, oh, wait. It's like the story of Joseph. Joseph tells them what is going to happen. They're like, whoa. I could count the number of people who actually have the real experience of God in these times. And then I bring it into our world today, even for the people who are watching us today. And many of them can say, well, I remember I had a headache some time ago, but they can't really tell whether it was God who did it. And sometimes there is a lack of consistency to that. So they say, well, something happened today. So what about the other time that you also didn't do it? So people say, I am just asking you in all fairness, can we fault someone who says, I cannot believe a God like this? You need to do more. And if they are asking that, what can we provide to them? I know this is a very, very deep question. If you want time, you just tell me. But we are going to go on and on.
We cannot fault the person, really. We cannot fault the person. At least from the Christian point of view, Christians believe that God gave us brains. He wanted us to be cerebral creatures, people who would
Right.
think through things, people who would be logical. So he would not expect us to simply take anything that is thrown at us. He would want us to test the evidence that's presented to us and be convinced by it, really.
Right.
Now, a lot of the times, if you pay attention to these debates, whether it's William Lane Craig against Christopher Hitchens or these other guys, usually the point becomes what really is a necessary entity. A necessary entity. A necessary entity is an entity that exists by itself and is sufficient in itself. Now,
Right.
if you really look at the earth and you can raise arguments, compelling arguments that the earth is necessary in itself, meaning that the earth could have come into existence by itself, then really you begin to throw a spanner into the works of Christianity or even all faiths, because really you have shut down the evidence of an intelligent designer, because you
Right.
have shown that even though the earth began to exist, it began to exist by itself. But the evidence really shows that everything that has existed or everything that has been caused was actually caused by an external cause. Every effect had an external cause because there is nothing necessary in itself on earth. If earth doesn't have nothing inside the earth has the attribute of necessariness, then it would be a very big leap. Now, not that it is out of the question, but you would just have to put some foundations under that leap to say the earth itself is necessary. Now, Christians say that there is a necessary entity, but the necessary
Right.
entity is the one that caused the earth you're seeing. And so he is the one that has always existed, but because time had to begin at a point, the earth itself would have started that. So it becomes that sort of back and forth. And
Right.
I would say here that when you pay attention to some of the um, finest atheists that have debated Christians,
Right.
some of the finest atheist thinkers. And for me, Christopher Hitchens was the finest.
Yeah.
He said that the best argument he has heard. In fact, this other British atheist, I forget his name now. Um,
The maths guy.
um, Richard Dawkins. Yes,
Dawkins.
Dawkins.
Okay, Dawkins.
And Dawkins has also confirmed this, that the argument that he thinks comes close to being very compelling for Christianity has to do with the fine-tuning argument. That
Right.
if you look at the universe and you look at Earth, why is it that for Earth, the conditions for life over here are perfectly aligned to the exact and precise point to allow life to go on.
Right.
Why is it that Earth is not so far away from the sun to become cold? Why is it not too close to the sun to become warm? Why is gravity exactly the way it is? And on and on and on. Now, the three arguments that have been raised by Christians, two atheists for that, is that it has to be by design, it has to be by chance, or it has to be by physical necessity. Now,
Right.
it cannot be by chance because the probability of that happening, someone has explained, is saying that you should stand on the moon, you aim at um, you aim at Jupiter, and then you are able to predict that it's going to fall on the head, and do that for about say 8,000 times, and each time it falls on heads. Now you realize that you are dealing in the realm of fairy dust because
Right.
it's almost impossible. So it really can't be chance. And then the physical necessity, which is that the earth created these conditions by itself, is one that atheists like to argue from. But it's not very compelling because really, how are you going to convince anyone that this earth we are seeing started itself and gave us all of these conditions itself? Why do none of these other planets we see in our solar system or any of the other ones we have seen in other galaxies behave like ours? So it leaves you with one choice, at least for people of faith, at least for theists, it leaves you with one
Okay.
choice, which is intelligent
God.
design. Yes, and that's God.
And
So
that's a very fascinating thing because again, like you said, granted that all this is solid, and like granted that there is this cause that is unprovable and there's no evidence for it. So science says, well, we don't know, right? That's a thing. Science goes and say, well, we don't know. I'm not saying every science, but I'm just saying the science says, well, this is where our knowledge ends. We just don't know. I think that's a fair way to look at it. And then there is also those who say, oh, we do know. We know it's God. And I think this is what the argument is about. And then there's a third group of people that I think those people probably are too lazy. And that's those who say, they call themselves agnostics. They say, well, we don't know, so we can't figure it out. I'm like, what are you doing? Is it that we can't know or you just don't want to know? So then we take the two sides, right? Those who say, well, you cannot just say it's God. I mean, it's granted, this is where our knowledge ends. It's granted, but you can't say it's God. And the next Christian who says, well, we think it's God. And that's the whole point of this conversation. Like, what is on what basis are we saying this is God? Is it because we have seen more of his works? Like is it because we have seen God show up in different ways? And then again, if you even say God, look at how many gods there are in the world.
yeah,
On
yeah.
what basis do you say this is the one true God? Finny.
Okay, so that's a very interesting one, and I must say, put it this way, that let me start by giving the African traditional religions version of how the fall happens. And forgive me if you are someone who is not a person of faith watching this. Really forgive me, but because of my Christian bent, I tend to look at things from a perspective of faith. So, in the African traditional religion, for their account, when they talk about how the fall happens, they say that in the beginning, Onyankopon, which is the way accounts refer to God, lived among human beings. In fact, he lived so close to human beings that the clouds were so down, and that women
Call
could
mommy for me.
stretch their hands to the clouds,
Call mommy.
pick some spices,
Call mommy
put
for
in
me.
their food if they needed some spices, and cook. So Onyankopon was very close to humanity. But Onyankopon used to complain about the pounding of fufu. Now, if you're not Ghanaian and you're watching this, fufu is a staple dish for their
Oh
country.
God.
Onyankopon used to say that it made a lot of noise, and they had promised to stop. But one day, an old woman decided to go pound fufu, and she was pounding, making a lot of noise. And Onyankopon, with a great shout, just moved away from earth and went to heaven, so that the clouds were no longer within reach of humanity. So everyone was wondering what to do, and then they decided to go back to Nyankopon to go and beg him. But how do you get to someone who has moved away from you and his clouds have departed? The
Right.
old man came up with an idea. Let's go for all the pistols in the world. Now, the pistols are the things that are used to pound fufu. if you're not Ghanaian, and you are supposed to place the pistons one on another till it reaches the heavens, and then a young man can climb and get to Yankopon to beg him for us. Now, they have put all the pistols in the world together, and it was left with one pistol to get to Yankopon. So the old man comes up with another suggestion. Since it's left with one, why don't we take the pistol that's on the ground and then take it up there, so that when you get up there, you just place that on top and go to Yankopon. Once they took the pistol from the ground, everything came falling down, and humanity was left wondering, oh, what are we going to do? Now, the story ends there. If you're a Christian and you hear that story, you realize there are similarities and differences. Now, the similarities are both religions, as in the Christian religion and the African traditional religion, is laying the blame for the chasm between man and God on man. It's saying that
Right.
you flouted God's rules. In Christianity, we say they ate from the tree that God told them not to. But in the
Right.
African traditional religion, they pounded fufu when God said they should not. Now, the other question you get that's similar is both of them are saying, how do we get back to God? It becomes a question that is supposed to be answered. But that is where Christianity takes it up a notch for. Christianity says that our God is relational. So even in our version of the fall, we find out that when they had sinned, God comes looking after man. And he comes looking after man and becomes a pattern that we see in the Old Testament, and it's fulfilled in the New Testament when God actually becomes a man and walks among us. So Christianity prides itself on the argument that God is relational, which is why we can't begin to find evidence for him, because he has come to live among us and to drop hints that will lead us to him.
Wow.
In other religions, they do not have that argument of God being relational. They have argument of God being formal with them, laying down instructions. You're supposed to do this at this time. Come and do this festival, and on and on and on. Christians say, okay, our God is relational. Now, the relationality of God is seen in the orderliness he has introduced in the universe. So, you pick any civilization in the world, and I love the Chinese civilization. The more I read on their history, I realize these guys were so intelligent. The Chinese had sent ships around that had come to Africa. They knew there were people here way before the Europeans came here to colonize us. The Chinese paper. See, the Chinese had introduced a printing press before centuries before Europe had a printing press. The issue comes down to their understanding of God. Now, because they did not see God as someone who was relational, they actually thought God was someone who would not want people peeping into the works of his creation. And so you would have to be very careful with how you go about finding things, because you could anger the people, the God behind creation. Now, contrast that to Europe, where after the Reformation, when Martin Luther and John Calvin and Tyndale and all these other guys put Bibles in the hands of the common man, they swore to themselves that they were going to make sure that the farmer on the field would be able to understand Christianity, so that the horrors that had been perpetuated by the Catholic Church would not be continued. Now, by putting the Bible in people's hands, people began to realize, wait, the God we are seeing in the Bible is a God who is methodical. And that means there must be some method to the madness we see in society. We see
society.
in spark science. So Christianity becomes the driving force behind science. That people are saying, no, we can understand botany, we can understand astrology, we can understand all of these things because a God who is orderly has put these things in order. So it is from there that you realize that how you perceive God actually adds to the evidence you get to have for if this God exists. Because if God is relational and he's intentional, then he has a certain realm for you where you can follow him. Now, just lastly, I'll say this.
Okay.
The Islamic faith and the Christian faith had some similarities on this. But because Islamic states had universities before Europe had universities, but they were only made to learn the Quran. You weren't allowed to learn a lot of knowledge about the universe. They burnt books that were looking to inquire into certain things because you can't know too much. You cannot know too much and begin to lose your fascination about creation for Allah. But the Christian faith rather said, yes, you can learn. Now, there were, of course, points of trying to limit people because they would throw a misinterpretation of, the eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and say don't go too far. Or they'll pick the story of Icarus who flew too close to the sun and his wings melted and he fell and say don't go too far. But it becomes clear when you look at history that because of the way Christianity understood God or saw God as relational, Christianity was able to make enquiries into the world. And it was this enquiry, this science, that even entrenched their belief that God exists. Because everything we found pointed to a creator who has done everything with us in mind.
I think this is interesting and this is fascinating. And for those of you who are joining us, actually, we're having a conversation on whether there could be evidence for a God who is spirit. And we started by talking about all there is and like in the universe, what we can observe and whether Christianity presents any evidence at all for this God. I think a lot of the conversation we've had we are yet to still address that question in some extent, and we will get there. So still be patient. But what we have been doing is just bringing this whole argument or conversation to realizing what makes us think that it is God, and whether or not, because of course we can see creation and we can see all the things that are happening in the world. Science says that this is how far our knowledge can get to. We cannot tell beyond this. Well, Christian says, well, there is someone called God. He's called Yahweh, Elohim. There's a Trinity God or a triune God. The other people are saying that, well, there's this God, there's this, that, this is Allah, this is that, and this is all that. And I'm trying to find out from Phinehas, who is the host of Faith and Reason, what the claims of the Bible are. What are the claims that we should learn about? What is it that the Bible is presenting to us, in evidence for God, as a proof to God? And I hope that we are able to get there. I really hope that we are able to get there. But if you have any questions so far, please put it there. Put it in the comment section. I'm going to ask Phinehas a follow up on this because, that was a brilliant submission, by the way. Again, it still doesn't say anything about God in that sense, because all these things about God, like I like the fact that you talk about, relational, and that is through Christ. And so I'm going to break it down and ask you if I get you and if I really understand what you're saying. So just correct me if I'm wrong. That what you're saying really is that Christianity provides a God who is relational. Okay, so where science ends and say this is how far we can go, Christianity says no, that's not how far we can go. That's not all there is, right? There's something beyond the material, and there is an immaterial, spaceless, timeless, everlasting God. That granted, that's of course science says okay, we can't verify that. So if you believe that, that's okay. So I'm speaking in fairness here. I'm not speaking for an atheist, but I think if I listen to the atheist, well, for most people, that's exactly the question that they're asking. That what is really a proof, and of course the burden of proof then lies on us, the people who claim there is God, not them, because they don't believe that there is anything beyond that. They can prove what is in material world, and that we can judge them on that. Like I could judge them and say, okay, prove black hole and all that. That's their burden because they say that exists. But then when it comes to God, we have to prove to them. And I said that Jesus seemed to have not only presented a God who was spiritual, and that's it. Jesus never said, just believe in him. Even though that, like he told Thomas that blessed is he who has not seen yet believe. But I think that Thomas had already been with him. And so it was not necessarily because Jesus was saying, just believe whatever you want to believe. But Thomas had seen what he had done. And that if he tells Thomas that, well, if I've done all these things and I'm telling you that I resurrect and you don't think it's me, then something is wrong. So that I could fairly grant that. But if you say that this is God, that where science ends, where we can observe is God, and God is relational, and God is this, and then you say, well, Christ, correct me if I'm wrong, that Christ is that, well, in a sense, the evidence, right? That God proves that he is there. The proof for the Christian God is Christ. And that if there is evidence that Christ was not just a normal person, like a human being, like a normal human being, and he did the impossible, and that all these things actually happened, then accept that Christ is the evidence. Is that what you're saying? So that if we could analyze and say, well, okay, let me look at Jesus, or does Christianity, present something more? Does it say maybe Christ and the church? That so that when I look at the church, I can say, well, maybe there's God. There's a God who's really loving. Like you're talking about relational, as though, like, how do I know that God is relational? Like, you just can't just say those things. Like, God is a father and he has a son. Like, who are you to say God is a father and he has a son? Like, why don't you say God is a mother or something? Like, you can't just make those things up. So, granted, right?
Yeah.
But are you saying to us that if we looked at Christ and then we looked at the church, then we will see all these evidence about God? Is that what you're saying?
And when I think about the multiple faith systems in the world, my answer to this would be yes. I would want us to look at Christ to find evidence for God, especially from a Christian point of view. The reason I say this is this: whatever experience people would give sincerely for having brought them to the Christian faith. Someone talks about how I did not used to believe in Jesus, but my uncle who was taking care of me got very sick. He was so close to death, and then one day I just prayed and I told God, God, if you exist and Jesus is real, then heal my uncle. And I went to sleep with tears. I woke up in the morning and my uncle was fit as a fiddle. And the person says that since then I've not looked back. I have believed in Jesus. Someone talks about how their marriage was falling, and a friend told them that if they would listen to Jesus, then their marriage would, stand strong, and they did. And because of that, they have stayed Christians, and their children are Christians, and on and on and on and on. Someone is a Muslim and needed a child and decided to go to a pastor who is his neighbor and said, look, I really need a child. So at this point, if you pray for me and my wife conceives, well, I'm converting to Christianity. And boy, 9 months from the very day I asked my friend to pray for me, I had a child. Those kind of things. They are very sincere testimonies, and they are really incredible when I hear them. But here's the thing. Every other faith system can say the same thing. Muslims can also say that, hey, I didn't used to be a Muslim, but my uncle was sick, and because my uncle was sick, I prayed and I said, Allah, if you're real and Muhammad is your prophet, then and the next day my uncle was well. I also became a Muslim. So at that point, it becomes experience against experience, as in what you personally have against what someone also personally has. And then at that point, where are we going from there? We are in a gridlock because everyone has to stand by their experience. So it then means that we need to move on to something else that is more objective, that would help us make a decision. And because Christianity insists that their Lord and Savior is the embodiment of truth, we hedge all our bets on Jesus. And we say that if you can prove or disprove, in this case, that Jesus is who he said he was or who he says he is, then you can discard the Christian faith. But if your investigations lead you to confirm that everything that Jesus said he was, or everything Christians have said about Jesus is true, then please embrace the evidence. So Jesus becomes the point of interest. That every Christian says you should investigate his claims, investigate his death, investigate his resurrection. Because really, if a Jewish carpenter, died and came back to life, and actually said he was going to do that before he died and came back to life, then it changes everything for us. So I would say yes, let us bank everything on the person of Jesus. And in fact, it would help people who cannot, because it depends on what science you're referring to. If someone says the science he's referring to is, where he can put things in the test tube and measure and say he has 2 grams of this and that, then Christianity cannot help him there and say, this is an immaterial God and he
Right.
weighs
Right.
4 kilograms.
Right.
But if you are willing to say an investigation into the truth of a pillar of Christianity, and
Right.
their foundation of Christianity is Jesus, if you can investigate that and that becomes true, then maybe there is more proof now for you to believe in the God the Father that this Son proceeds from, sort of. So it then means
That
you
makes
can use
sense.
material person, historical evidence of Jesus to say, let's investigate that. And then maybe we can use that to have some sense of
Right.
proof.
So generally, what you're saying is that, well, this invisible God has a visible image. But, and then I
Yes.
think that's exactly what the Bible says, that
Yes.
Jesus Christ is the
Yes.
express image of God. So Christianity, unlike the other religion, and I will tell you that these are some of the reasons why I believed in Jesus, or like Christianity, or the Christian God, because I could not find in any of these religions any other thing. Some of them will talk about the mind, some of them talk about, I'm like, okay, all these are things that are secondary to the matter. Like, I get that, it's like it could supplement something, like someone can say, I believe in Jesus, but I practice Buddhism. And I maybe we say, okay, fine, you can do yoga and whatever you want if you want to meditate. That's not really my problem. I'm not saying I have no permission or no authority to give that permission to anyone. But I'm saying that, those are secondary. The real substance is with all these claims about where science ends. And for me, that was my pursuit, really, where it came, okay, this is the claim of God, the claim for God, and this is the thing. And I'm like, okay, so how do I know? And Christianity, maybe through my research, somebody should help me if I missed out on any of these. And by the way, I took a whole 1-year course on Islam university, so it's not like I didn't try. I did, actually. The Christianity present, all the other present a prophet who did things that I don't even understand and stuff like that. Christianity presents this man as the evidence. So if you had to list all these things that people are presenting as the evidence for God, Christianity presents Jesus and says, okay, look at him. But then again, I think there is more, and that's what I'm going to ask you about. Because if you say Jesus, then the only thing we have right now, if it was then, people would believe. I would have believed if I walked in the time of Jesus. Why wouldn't I? He walked on water. Lazarus was dead and people are rushing in the house, and I heard that the man brought him. Like, what would be the reason why I wouldn't believe? But I don't live in those times. I don't live in those times. I don't live in those times. I live in the time where, I don't even know whether these historical accounts can be trusted. When I know human beings have actually held these texts. So when people say there are things in the Bible, I don't even doubt it. When scholars says, and this wasn't added, I said, whatever, I don't even doubt it. The only thing that I think, I trust now is the Holy Spirit, because the Bible says even the whole Bible was inspired by him. So I'm like, okay, whoever the Holy Spirit is, I'm going to look for him. So that's me, my story. I'm not going to just debate about these things and stuff like that. I'm not saying it's wrong. But the point I want to make is this. If all we say is that Christianity is only presenting Jesus, and that if we can verify and if we can say that, the historical account of Jesus Christ is true, then we have to accept God to be true. In a way that makes sense. But is that what the Bible is teaching? Is that sufficient? Because if we have to do that, and there are different types of evidence, like you talked about, this is not something you verify by empirical evidence. It doesn't even make sense. But then, of course, testimonial evidence are there. What people do say that they saw and other things could be verified. Or sometimes we even use fossils and other things like that. So it doesn't really matter. But is that what I think? When I study the Bible, I don't think that's all that the Bible is presenting to us. Because Jesus says, these people are going to be my witnesses. He talked about his people. Right. And this is where I think that we walk away from when people say, but look at them. He says signs and wonders will follow them. There's no signs and wonders following them. And it's okay, now look at Jesus. It's like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you saying that I should look at Jesus? I wasn't there. Now he says I should look at you. You said, no, look at Jesus. And there's a part where Jesus talked about if the world could see love among them, then they will know that they are his disciples. Then we look at them, there's no love. They say, oh, look at Jesus, he's love. Like, what are you doing? Anthony, what is really the Bible saying?
That's a very good one. that's a very good one. I must start by saying, that Christians do it in good faith. We do it in good faith. We feel like it would be wrong for us to leave the sun, and I'm really referring to the sun in our solar system, and points to the moon as evidence for light, for example.
Right.
So we feel like once the ultimate sign exists, then whilst we are pointing to the other signs, we should not leave out the ultimate sign, that is Jesus. So we do it in good faith. Maybe we've done it wrongly.
But what about it? What about if it is night? Do you point to the sun or do you point to the moon?
You point to the sun and say, well,
when it's night, it's night. It's that we live in a dark world, by the way. So if you point to the sun and say, I can't see any sun, I'm just kidding. I'm just making it, But oh no, Finney, I can't lose you now. We're almost done. I hope that Finney gets back very soon. Okay, yeah, he is back. Yeah, Finney, but that was just, I'm just kidding. Don't mind me. Let's continue.
It's a very good one. So I must say that. So yes, that's where I'm starting from. But I'll go on to say, yes, there is still evidence that God is still at work in the world, and here's one way I've come to see miracles. And I'm thankful for the definition I had for miracles while I was growing up. I just don't subscribe to it in totality anymore. I grew up and I was told that a miracle is when God intervenes with the natural order of things. God steps in and God does something that we can all see He did. And I think it means well, but the implications of that explanation is that when God has not intervened, He has left the world to be. So it's not really running. He's not really involved in the affairs of the world until He intervenes. That's the implication.
Oh, I don't know.
That someone could argue from that. So what is really happening there is that the Bible tells us that God rules in the affairs of men. And that means that at every point in time, God is at work. So when miracles have occurred, He's not intervening per se, as much as He's just showing His hand a bit more, really. So the signs that Jesus gave His disciples, Jesus gave, and some Christians, in fact, they are cessationists and they are continuationists. Cessationists would say that the signs that Jesus gave to His disciples were for only the apostles. That when He talks about the fact that they would cast out demons and they would speak in new tongues, they would pick up snakes, they would drink, any deadly thing, and they will not be harmed. Our cessationist friends in Christianity would say that was for the apostolic age. That the apostolic age ended and we cannot look for these signs anymore. But I beg to differ, because historically we have seen that even today people are testifying about these signs being made evident. Now, someone would say, charismatics and Pentecostals, would point to the Azusa Street in 1901 and talk about how the gift of tongues were brought back in the world. And the pushback I would give is, well, based on how the world was at the time, in 1901, news would not travel as fast as it did today. So if you had someone who was speaking in new tongues in the US, and really that's where it started from, if you had someone who was speaking in new tongues in the US, and then you found out 10 years later that within 6 months of this person speaking in new tongues in the US, someone was speaking in new tongues in Russia and new tongues in China, would you say that the person was influenced by the person in the US? No. You would have to admit that maybe there is some divine hand at work making people speak in new tongues, so that it is not someone who's simply being influenced by the person and saying that speak it. It means that probably God is saying my signs have not ended. Now, if people still have evidence of casting out demons, you cannot say that it ended in the time of the apostles. And I get some of the argument. They say that when it comes to holding snakes and drinking deadly things, a lot of the continuationists, and I'm a continuationist for the record, a lot of the continuationists would say, at that point, maybe Jesus was referring to something metaphorical, and so we cannot say the first two are what Jesus exactly is saying, and then these last two, picking up snakes and drinking any deadly thing, are metaphorical. And I agree. But even there, I say that there are people who have testified of having drunk very deadly things who are alive today. Not that they deliberately drank them, but they had to drink them without knowing that it was deadly. They found out later that it was deadly and they had drunk them. But by the providence of God, they were saved. Miraculous. So the point I'm driving at is that there are still signs today that people can use to say, oh, God is still showing his hand in the world. Except that Christians insist that these signs are the moon. Please don't forget the sun, because whatever sign you might give, people might try to disabuse your mind about these signs. Really, there are explanations are plenty for why something could have happened. If you want to talk about whether it's the sign of casting out a demon, then we can go bring you a psychologist from Harvard University who would explain what was going on, and you might think, okay, maybe let me rethink what I thought was casting out a demon.
Right.
What people cannot fight is what history tells us about this person of interest that is Jesus and the evidence that he actually resurrected from the dead. Those are good things to hedge on and then use the signs that occur every day as complementary to the ultimate evidence for Jesus's historicity.
That's good. That's good. Thank you so much, Finney. Our time is up, but let me just make sure that I recap on that. Help me if I made any mistake where, with what I'm going to say. So basically, what we've been trying to understand is what could be the evidence for a God who is spirit. We said, well, of course, all of us are like the typical scientist or atheist today who says, well, I just believe in the material and the science and all that. All of us are like that. I believe in the science, till I get to a point where science says that, well, we can't go further. We don't know what is there. So all of us, in a way, can accept that we are like you, atheists. Like, you're not that powerful and wise. We're like you. Like, I hate it when people make it seem as if believing in God is foolish and that these people don't make. They're like you. They literally just got to the point where they said, there's nothing more. Oh, but I think there is something more. And then they said, well, let's fairly listen to the Christians, or let's listen to every other person. And then they said, okay, let's all present the evidence for God. There's something that is more. We think there is a being, a power, a person, whoever, and this is the evidence for God. And then they say, okay, where's your evidence? They say, well, I don't know, there's something. And then another faith says, okay, well, what about you? There's a prophet. There's a prophet here in Arabia. Okay, oh fine. And then Jesus, and the Christian says, okay, we think that there is a God who actually became man, who was born by a virgin. That's interesting. I mean, you have my attention. Let's talk. Because again, I mean, if your God was born by a virgin, okay, let's talk. And then you said, okay. And so Christian, I think that this is the point, and I feel we need to communicate it better than just making it seem as if the Christian faith is foolish. It's not. This is basically, like you're saying, this is the basis for our faith, that the faith is not that we are just foolish, that we throw away what is material. We can see clearly what is in the material world. We believe what is in the material. We believe in science. This is not an argument about, and it pains me that these scholars and the most intelligent guys make this about science and religion. It's all like it's faith, then you don't believe in science. And then when COVID happened, the Christians also did the same thing to them. And they call them, those are conspiracy theories. Like those who say, no, there's no COVID and there's nothing. And then they say, okay, show us the evidence. They say, oh, but the evidence is, why is it not flu? And I'm like, no, look at you. They play the same game with you. Now you don't want it. Look at you. And I was so angry and pissed with those Christians. I said, come on, stop that. But then again, I said, you can't blame them. That's the same thing that you guys who are, you think you are, intelligent. You do. You pin the same thing. There's no evidence for that. Now they say, okay, there's no evidence for that. You say, oh, look at the people in the hospital. They say, of course, people are always in the hospital. What? How do you say that is evidence for? And I said, no, look at you. So basically, the Christian faith is not stupid. It is sure, and it is built on this belief that the evidence for God is actually in a man, and a God, God becoming man in the form of Jesus. And actually, not only that he did signs and wonders, but he demonstrated his love, like you talked about, relational, and that was very profound. And so we said, okay, fine, but we are living in 2024. We are not living in 81 or whatever. We are living in 2024. So how then do we find a proof for this God? Do we still say, well, let's go and look at the historic evidence? And you and I know that, of course, there will still be people who will say there are no truth to these facts and to these historical accounts. We can't verify them. There is not sufficient. Granted, granted. And if you said, well, yes, you can look at the Christians today. You can look at the people. You can see God in them. You can see the truth of God in them. But again, it's like the moon. That is still not the sun. That ultimately, if you just looked at the Christians today, you'll be wrong and say, well, they're not loving. But you can still see love in Christ. You can still see peace in Christ. You can still power in Christ and truth in Christ. So this is the account of the Christian. I know that there could be more, but if you didn't join us earlier, I hope that this summary helps. And we will be back next week. I have a lot to share with you guys. Finney, I want to say thank you for being here. And I want to thank all of you also for joining me. We will be back. I plan to run a series with Finney. It's going to be good ones. I don't know. We will see. But thank you guys for sticking around. Please help me do this. I want to ask you for this good favor. I really want to talk to many people. I want to talk to some of the renowned people in the world. I want to ask the questions that I like. Some of these questions I've been asking Finney. And so help me. I think your subscription will help, and you sharing with your friends and asking them to share will help us so that we can have more of these conversations. I don't think this take anything away from Christianity. I don't think so. People get uncomfortable with questions like this and honest conversations like this. So, you don't need to be. God is not scared of your questions. If there is God, he's not scared of. Ask questions. Question anything, whatever it is. He's not scared of you. Okay? I mean, let me just say it to you. He's not scared. Whether you are an atheist, whether you are a skeptic, whether you are agnostic, God is not scared of your questions. But here's the thing. If we just made a conclusion that because something is not provable, it's not true, that will not be fair. And you and I know that there are many things in life that we can't prove, but we know they are true. That will not be fair. But if also we said, because it's not provable, we should accept it to be true, that will also not be fair. And so this is also to Christians. You cannot just go around saying that, accept God because he's God. No, that's not sufficient reason to make anything a truth claim. You could say, well, it's a useful belief, and the people say, granted, even if it's useful really, because people use religion for all kinds of bad things, and hope to get virgins, and people do all kinds of things. But here's the thing. What is useful does not necessarily mean it's true. And I really believe that if God is true, and like I said, I'm saying these things with my faith bracketed. I'm not saying it as a Christian. I'm saying that as a human being like you and I, that if God is true, he will want all of us to come to a place of truth. All of us, no matter what the truth looks like, no matter what it is. And so don't be scared to ask and to seek. We will be back next week with another interesting conversation. I want to thank all of you. I can see all your questions and all your contributions in the chat. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, all of you guys. Our time is up, but we will be back. Don't forget to subscribe. Do have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.